My name is Heidi Alder, and I practice education law in Utah. To give you a little bit of background about where I come from, I was a school teacher. Before I went to law school, I taught U.S. history to 8th graders, and then went to law school to change the system, which didn't really happen. But I studied the general law classes, took an education law class, but as it turns out, education law is a very small niche in Utah, and so I ended up at a law firm that did everything but education law. I was there for about 3 years and then went back to teaching. I went back to a private school and taught for a number of years while contracting with the State Office of Education as a hearing officer. After about 3 years of teaching again, I returned to the law at the State Office of Education in the Law and Legislation Division, where I was an education specialist for the next 3 years, and I recently left to develop a private practice in education law. So I'm going to talk about 5 things that every new lawyer needs to know about the practice of education law. Number 1, whom do we represent? Who are our clients? Attorneys who specialize in education law may represent a number of different entities, including local education agencies like school districts and charter schools, state education entities, state offices of education, teacher associations, school administrator associations, school board associations, school boards, both district and charter boards, colleges, universities, and essentially any organization that deals with students. School law attorneys can represent both private and public schools. Number 2, who pays us? By whom are we employed? Education attorneys can be employed by a private firm or in-house. In Utah, there is an education division within the Office of Attorney General, and the attorneys there advise the several state institutions of higher education as well as the State Board of Education. The University of Utah, which has its own Office of General Counsel employing about 17 attorneys, is the largest employer in the state of Utah. Those 17 attorneys work at the University of Utah, but then also work in conjunction with attorneys in the Education Division at the Attorney General's office. Number 3, what issues do education attorneys deal with? Because educational institutions are in many ways like small corporations, the legal issues that arise are wide and varied. As a governmental entity, for example, we must deal with constitutional issues, such as First Amendment rights of students and teachers. What limits, for example, can schools place on students and teachers' freedom of expression? What about free exercise rights? Second Amendment rights, guns on campus, safety, school safety issues come up quite a bit. Fourth Amendment rights, can administrators search student lockers? What about student cars? What about student backpacks or cell phones? Fifth Amendment rights, does a teacher have to answer questions put to him during an investigation by his administrator where those answers may criminally implicate him in a subsequent criminal proceeding? Eighth Amendment rights, can you hit a student? Or is that considered a violation of the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Amendment? 14th Amendment rights, equal protection under the law, due process rights for both students and teachers facing disciplinary proceedings. To continue, as counsel for employers, as all educational institutions are, we advise on employment issues. In Utah, public education teachers in districts are governed by the Public Education Human Resources Management Act, which is specific to human resources for teachers. Charter schools, their teachers, however, are at-will employees. So as counsel for schools, both districts and charters, we have to know both that state law as well as general employment law. There are several state and federal laws that are specific to educational institutions. For example, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, a federal law that pertains to special education. The Family Education Rights to Privacy Act, FERPA, also a federal act that pertains to the privacy of student records. Title IX, equal access to educational programs regardless of sex. The entire Title 53A and 53B of the Utah Code deal with education, both secondary and higher ed, as well as primary, secondary, and higher ed. Other non-legal issues that educational attorneys deal with may be open records and open meetings laws, real estate acquisition, construction, bonding for new construction or real estate acquisition, basic board governance, contract issues, negotiating, drafting, executing contracts with vendors, compliance with the procurement code, other transactional matters like licensing agreements, trademark, copyright, and sponsorship. So number 4, what do we do every day? Depending on the employer, daily tasks for those who practice education law vary. Lawyers at the State Office of Education write all of the agency rules under the Utah Administrative Procedures Act, investigate and prosecute educator misconduct, provide compliance training, track legislation, and answer questions from districts, superintendents, parents, etc. School district in-house attorneys draft policies, advise the superintendent and/or the school board regarding any of the issues that I discussed previously, and represent districts in administrative hearings. Attorneys at higher education institutions do a great deal of transactional work, a lot of the licensing agreements I mentioned. They also, of course, deal with any student-related issues regarding safety and security, and then again, all employment law issues. Private attorneys represent schools in court or administrative hearings, help with policies, provide advice and direction when needed. If employed by the State Attorney General's office, attorneys there advise their respective boards on a host of legal issues, including drafting legal opinions when requested, attending board meetings, and ensuring compliance with applicable rules and laws. The Utah Education Association employs one full-time in-house general counsel who provides legal representation to members in disciplinary and termination proceedings, including defense of negative job actions. Also, the general counsel provides legal advice and counsel to the UEA board, the board president, executive director on matters internal and external to the association. Last, how does one get involved in education law if that is an interest? Utah has a section of the bar dedicated to education law, the education law section. There are approximately 50 members with varying levels of involvement. The current chairperson is Dan Harper. He is an attorney at Canyons School District, and his contact information will be provided on the internet following this presentation. There are also a couple of national organizations focused around school lawyers. The Council of School Attorneys, or COSA, is a national association of several hundred attorneys who represent various educational institutions around the country. And the Education Law Association, or ELA, is a similar organization. Both of the websites that will include further information are included in this presentation, which will be posted. Thank you.